Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and welcome to this Domestic Violence Awareness Month live with us at the Domestic Violence Center of Chester County. We are so proud today to be joined by Tanner Pulse from the Brandywine Valley SPCA and State Representative Christina Sappey. Welcome to you both.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I want to first remind everyone and anyone tuning in that we will be taking and sharing live questions and comments. So please feel free to leave a question or some thoughts in our comment section, and it could possibly show up during our conversation this afternoon. I am excited to provide this webinar with our friends at the Brandywine Valley SPCA, with whom we've been partnering on Domestic Violence Awareness Month efforts for several years. We paint the shelter purple together each year and provide all the shelter dogs with bright purple bandanas, and it spices them up a little bit, and we've seen that they get adopted pretty quickly in that nice purple color. But we also, as some of our viewers may remember, hosted a webinar in 2020 where we had a conversation about the intersections between domestic violence and animal cruelty. And during this webinar, we learned that a staggering 71% of survivors entering shelters report that their abusers have threatened, injured, or even killed a family pet. And that the fear for their pet's safety actually can paralyze about 40% of survivors, preventing them from leaving abusive situations. And even those who do leave, about 65% of them continue to worry regularly about the safety of the pets that they've left behind. And most unfortunately, and shockingly, the statistic that 1 in 4 survivors have returned to an abusive situation out of fear for their beloved pet's safety. And so in Pennsylvania, while our law recognizes that the threat to or the killing or harming of a pet constitutes domestic abuse, which can be grounds for a PFA, a protection order, pets themselves are not currently in our law included in these orders. And so today we're really excited to invite Representative Sappey, along with our partners at the Brandywine Valley SPCA, to shed light on a piece of legislation, PA House Bill 1210. So my first question, and I'll really just ask the representative, please just share with us a little bit about this bill. What will this piece of legislation potentially do or change for victims and survivors of abuse?
So thank you so much for doing this and for having this conversation, because it's such important legislation. What it will do is include companion animals in a protection from abuse. And a protection from abuse, for anyone who may be watching that isn't familiar, is, it's a judge orders, an abuser to stay away from the victim and the family. And frequently, I mean, right now, animals are not protected, as you said, in that PFA. And as you also noted, they are frequently targeted to further abuse and to further that type of that emotional control over the victim. And frequently children are kind of ensnared in this whole scenario. So I'm not going to go into examples of the type of abuse, because I'll be really honest with you, as I've been working on this legislation over the last 4 years, the examples that get shared with me from, my partners at the Humane Society of PA and Humane Pittsburgh are so horrific. I can't speak them. And once you hear them, it's very difficult to get out of your mind what an abuser can do to an animal. And that's something that stays in your head and frankly could be very triggering for anyone watching. So I'm not going to talk about the type of abuse, just know that it's absolutely horrific. And these animals have to be included in these PFAs. It's so important. But that's really the gist of the legislation. I mean, this is our second term introducing it. It made it through the House last term. House term is every 2 years, or a legislative term is every 2 years, and then the legislation dies. So we reintroduced it, and hopefully we'll get it through the Senate by the end of the term, which will be, November 30th, 2023. So I'm hopeful there, but that's, I can go into a lot more detail, but that's the gist of it right there.
No, thank you so much. Now, I'm just always curious about the why that drives a lot of legislative decisions, and a lot of our legislators have specific priorities and things that their heart is in it for. And so, I would just like to ask you personally, what inspired you to assist in, presenting and reintroducing now House Bill 1210?
Thank you for that question, because that's where I think, a lot of legislation starts by the public bringing it to a legislator's attention. We can't know everything that's going on out there, but my priorities are very strongly rooted in community, in family, community, children, and animals. And that's just, when you think of my district, those are the things you think of. You think of our community and our open space, and we love our animals in the 158th, of all different sizes, from the meadow vole to, our bovine friends. So it's an equine friends as well. And, dogs have become, in the last, I'd say 10, 15 years, dog ownership, pet ownership has increased significantly. And so the number of people being impacted by this type of abuse, unfortunately, has increased. And so when, advocates like yourself and the SPCA come to legislators and say, we really think we have a problem here and we need to include animals in PFAs, it's kind of a no-brainer, given the work that I've done as a staffer before I ran for office on trauma-informed systems and, adverse childhood experiences. This dovetails very neatly into that space. We have, children that are impacted in violent homes. And when the pet gets left behind, you've got a victim and children in a shelter worrying about what's happening back home to the animal. And it's just like that, just another layer of trauma on top of a very volatile situation. So I think we can help families become safer and more whole by addressing this need.
Thank you so much. So one of the most important questions, I guess, because we want this to pass this term and to be able to protect pets in these situations. So where is House Bill 1210 now? And what can we do kind of as the community members? Sometimes we feel helpless with these things. What can we do to kind of support it moving through and its passage eventually?
Thank you so much for asking that, because that's a question we do get asked a lot when we're trying to move a piece of legislation. So right now, I'm really pleased to say that this legislation passed out of the House Judiciary Committee bipartisanly, and is passed the House floor in a bipartisan way, and is now over in the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Senator Lisa Baker and Senator Steve Santisero, both of whom I respect tremendously. Senator Lisa Baker is Republican majority chair of that committee, and Senator Steve Santisero is the minority chair, and they're both really good people. And so I happen to have their contact information for advocates to contact their offices and let them know that they want this bill to be considered in committee. You can contact Lisa Baker's office at 717-787-7428, and Senator Santisero, and that's spelled Santarsiro, is 717-787-7305. And most likely you're going to, the person answering the phone will be a staff person. My advice is always, when you're advocating for something, be respectful of their time. They know your passion if you're taking the time to call, especially from outside of their constituent areas, that you want this bill to run in committee. But you're saying that this House Bill 1210 is extremely important to you and to Pennsylvanians, and that you'd like to see the committee consider this bill and get it to the floor for a vote, because we're pretty close to the governor's desk. That's where we want to get this, and it's an important piece of legislation. So that's what you can do. The other thing you can do is let your friends know. And obviously, when we talk about dog ownership and pet ownership in general, just being on the rise over the last decade or so, chances are everyone loves animals at this point, or a lot of them do. So let them know about this piece of legislation, talk it up, and give them that contact information as well. Share this video. So just, get the word out there, because we're close. And this is our second term, and it usually takes a while to get this far. So we're really close. We can do this.
That's wonderful. Wonderful news to know how close we are, and to have something concrete that we can do, somewhere to contact and something to do and say. And if you will, after this, if you'd like to share that contact information with me, and then I can include it in this post. I can add it to the caption here and encourage our community to
just one more thing too, to include when you're talking to people advocating about this, or when you're talking to the senator's offices, remind them that over 70 organizations statewide support this legislation. And we're talking about district attorneys, prosecutors associations, not just animal lovers. It's a wide list of organizations that support this. So I'm going to just look real quick at my list here to make sure, but it's the Sheriff's Association, PA Attorney General's Office, animal welfare, local law enforcement, and victim advocacy groups. That's a list of over 75 that are included in there, but a lot of law enforcement in addition to the advocacy groups.
Now, I want to just pass the mic, per se, to Tanner, who shared earlier with us offline a little bit about his experience advocating for very similar legislation. And I'd love to just kind of give you the floor to share a little bit about that experience, so that we could potentially learn from it as we develop similar legislation and advocate for similar legislation here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. And I think I'd also like to say thank you to the DVCC for everything that you as an organization do day in and day out for our survivors, and ensuring that families have a safe place to land, frankly. And Representative, thank you for your leadership and your advocacy, because this piece of legislation is vitally important, not only to survivors, but pet owners, and frankly, us as a sheltering community, because we often see the negative signs of abuse in the animals coming to us in our wellness centers and our veterinarian hospitals, but also we work with the survivors and their pets during transition by providing sheltering services for those pets. And ironically, we were very involved in the state of Delaware last year with their passage of Senate Bill 70, which is model legislation and incorporating PFA to their statute. So it is truly an important piece that 36 states now have on the books. And really, two statistics that always stood out when we were advocating for that piece of legislation in the state of Delaware. One is 99% of pet owners consider animals to be companions or members of the family. So that just demonstrates the social emotional ties to those animals, to the family. They're an extension, and they truly are just that. The second is 97% of callers to the National Domestic Violence Hotline said keeping their pet with them is an important decision or deciding factor in seeking sheltering. So that really means that if we're able to be more comprehensive and offering protections and safeguards for those animals, the likelihood that those survivors then move into a sheltering environment, even more so. So reducing those barriers for survivors when trying to place an animal. If a survivor in the shelter is not able to accommodate that pet, that's why they would come to Brandywine Valley SPCA, It's really important. And frankly, that's why we do what we do. Brandywine Valley SPCA isn't just an animal shelter. We look comprehensively at the entire family continuum and say, how can we ensure that through every stage of pet ownership, from adoption to animal care to wellness visits, and then of course all these ancillary and vitally important topics such as domestic violence or pet food pantries. That's really a one-stop shop that we try to embed here at BVSPCA. So, Representative, I cannot express my thanks and gratitude to you enough, because you're really leading by example. And this piece of legislation, House Bill 1210, is vitally important. And advocacy, I think the representative laid it out. We've got to be calling collectively as a voice these senators and saying, please release it from committee, get it on the floor for a vote, and then ultimately get it to the governor's desk for signature. And that's exactly what we did in Delaware. It was a multi-pronged approach. And as an individual who worked in government for many, many years, I think elected and policymakers respect even more when there's diverse stakeholder groups. The representative just said 70 plus organizations support this legislation, from sheriffs to police to DAs to animal welfare to DV. That's exactly what we need to get this done and through over the finish line. So I just appreciate the opportunity to be here with both of you.
Absolutely. I echo those sentiments wholeheartedly. We did get a question from one of our viewers right now about how we've at the Domestic Violence Center seen this issue kind of manifest. And I will speak to just a variety of the experiences that we've seen. We have seen many families fearful of a pet's safety and health and well-being when they have come to our shelter. As many of you know, Domestic Violence Center does have an emergency crisis shelter. However, like many, because I think it's only about 3 to 12% of shelters in the United States can accept pets, unfortunately. And so ours is not one of those. And so in this, we have seen cats and dogs and so sometimes even snakes and things that people love very much. And they fear for not only the safety, but the well-being. If I'm not there, who's taking care of them? Who's feeding them? Who's loving them? And so we have, worked very closely with the Brandywine Valley SPCA, with Pause for Courage, with a number of organizations that can help briefly shelter pets. But we've also, we work very closely with our survivors to seek family and friends who could maybe foster their pet during times like that. But what has really been beneficial is we have several longer term housing programs, and we've worked very closely with our state and our county and our survivors to do what we need to do to make sure that our survivors' pets are able to stay with them in those long-term housing programs that we have, whether it's registering their pet as a formal emotional support pet with the state, or working through other safety needs that we must, because we do understand the importance of these family members, because that's what they really are at the end of the day. They are another family member, and domestic violence is family violence and family abuse. So they are just as impacted, as we know, by abuse in the home, but they also are just as important to protect when abuse occurs. And I was really excited to see when I opened up and I read House Bill 1210. And I'll tell you, it's not that profound of a change. It's we protect the children, and now we're also going to protect a family member who is the pet, a companion. And I think that it's a no-brainer. I'm really excited for the opportunity to share about this. I'm not sure if many of our community members tuning in or who will be seeing this were aware of this before. And so I'm really excited to help increase awareness of this, but also to encourage our community to advocate. And so, like I said before, I will put the contact information that Representative Sappey shared with us in our caption this afternoon or this evening. So please reach out and let's get this legislation moving, but let's also share this. So please feel free. This live video does not end today. You can share it on your news feed. You can share it with your friends. You can copy and paste the link in a text and send it to your family. Anyone who loves animals, I think, will be impacted by the fact that there are no protections for animals who are currently living in abusive homes, and this gives them that protection. And so I can't thank you both enough. Do either of you have anything that you'd like to leave our community with?
Just have one quick thing. I want to give a shout out to my co-prime sponsor, State Representative Natalie Mihalik, who have co-primed this legislation with the last 2 terms. She's out in the Pittsburgh area. And so, this is a bipartisan bill, which I'm also really proud of. And that's just another aspect when you're advocating for this legislation over in the Senate, make sure they understand that, it's strongly supported statewide, but it's also a bipartisan piece of legislation that works for all Pennsylvanians. I mean, think about the fact, we bring dogs and cats and other animals into nursing homes for comfort. We bring them into schools and disaster zones after something horrific has happened. And so that just illustrates the power these animals have in our lives to heal us and to comfort us. We should protect them in these situations. So thank you so much for your work, both of you. I'm so pleased to work with you on this, and let's get to work and finish it up.
I can't say it any better than that. So thank you both. Representative took every word out of my mouth, so I appreciate that. But I do think that ultimately, as we continue to collaborate, we're going to not just have an impact on human lives, but those animal lives as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon and go Phillies.